The alarm on my wrist buzzed twice before I even opened my eyes, and I knew something had gone wrong on deck 4. I grabbed my tool case and ran through the narrow service corridor, my boots echoing against metal that was never built for human feet. By the time I reached the main hall, I understood why my hands were shaking. The royal court was in full session, and the power conduit beneath the central dais had failed. I am Daniel Cole, and I fix things nobody else wants to touch. That is the only reason humans are allowed inside this palace at all. We repair what the Valkyrie nobles consider beneath their dignity. We crawl through vents, we patch wires, we keep their beautiful ship of a palace breathing, and in return, we are barely looked at. Most days, that suits me fine. Today, it almost got me killed. The moment I dropped to my knees beside the broken conduit, the air in the hall changed. I felt it before I understood it. The constant murmur of Valkyrie voices, layered and musical, cut off like someone had pulled a switch. I froze with my hands still inside the open panel, sparks hissing near my fingers, and looked up. Every noble in that enormous hall had turned to face one direction. Guards straightened. Servants lowered their eyes. Even the great chandeliers of light crystal above us seemed to dim in respect, and walking straight toward me, past thrones and banners and centuries of tradition, was the royal heir. I had seen the heir before, always from a distance, always surrounded by guards and advisors who never let anyone within 10 paces. Their name was Sarah Vantillion, next in line to rule an empire that stretched across a dozen star systems. Their eyes were pale gold, sharp enough to cut through excuses, and right now, those eyes were fixed on me. I did the only thing my training told me to do. I bowed my head and stayed very still, hoping this was some coincidence, that they were simply passing through on the way to somewhere important. But the footsteps did not pass. They stopped directly in front of me, and the silence in that hall grew so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Nobody spoke to a technician mid-repair. Nobody, especially not the future ruler of an empire, crossed an entire court to stand over a human covered in grease and sweat. I felt every eye in that room burn into the back of my neck, and I understood, without needing to be told, that I had somehow broken a rule I did not know existed. Sarah crouched down beside me, close enough that I could see my own startled reflection in their eyes. Their voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried across the frozen hall like a struck bell. They asked how long the repair would take. I answered honestly, because lying to royalty seemed like an even worse idea than staying silent. I said it would take 10 more minutes if nobody distracted me. A ripple of gasps spread through the nobles nearby. Quiet, but unmistakable. I realized too late that answering back, without formal titles, without groveling, was its own kind of scandal. Sarah did not seem offended. If anything, something like curiosity flickered across their face. They asked why the conduit had failed in the first place, when Valkyrie engineers had inspected it only 2 days earlier. I explained, still working with my hands as I spoke, that the engineers had followed the manual perfectly, but the manual assumed a stable power flow that this palace no longer had, not since the newer reactor had been installed last season. The old wiring could not handle the surge pattern. It was not a mistake. It was outdated information colliding with new technology. Sarah tilted their head, and for the first time, I heard something new in their voice. Interest, real and unguarded. They asked how I knew that, when 3 senior engineers had missed it. I told them the truth. I told them that humans do not trust manuals the way Valkyrie do. We test things. We break them on purpose sometimes, just to see where they fail, because waiting for something to fail on its own is far more dangerous. I told them that back on Earth, before any of us had ever met another species among the stars, we built machines that constantly betrayed us, and we learned to expect failure instead of fearing it. A noble somewhere behind Sarah made a disapproving sound, sharp and clipped, clearly outraged that a technician was lecturing the future ruler of the empire. Sarah did not even turn around. They simply raised one hand, and the sound stopped immediately. I finished the repair while they watched, sealing the panel shut and testing the flow twice before standing up completely. My knees ached, my hands were black with grease, and I was standing in front of royalty looking like exactly what I was, which was nobody important. Yet Sarah did not step back. They studied me, the way someone studies a puzzle they did not expect to enjoy solving. They asked my name, I told them, and something shifted in their expression, small but real, like they were memorizing it on purpose. Then they asked a question that silenced the room even further, if that was possible. They asked why humans, who arrived here as a defeated people, showed no fear when speaking to their betters. I chose my words carefully, aware that an entire court was listening, aware that whatever I said next could shape how humans were treated in this palace for years to come. I told them that fear does not fix machines, and it does not solve problems. I told them that back home, we had faced disasters far worse than losing a war against a stronger enemy, and every time, the people who survived were the ones who kept working instead of kneeling. I said that respect, in my experience, was something earned through actions, not something given automatically because of birth or bloodline. For a long moment, nobody moved. I thought I had gone too far, that I would be dragged away and never seen in this palace again. Then Sarah did something that broke centuries of tradition, in front of hundreds of witnesses. They smiled. It was small, barely visible, but among the Velkhari, open expressions of amusement in a formal court were almost unheard of, especially from someone of royal blood. The nobles around us reacted as if the ground had shifted beneath their feet. Whispers broke out immediately, urgent and confused. Sarah ignored them completely. They asked if I would be willing to inspect the reactor system myself, since it seemed their engineers had grown too comfortable trusting old manuals instead of testing new realities. I glanced past their shoulder at the sea of stunned faces, robes trimmed in gold, jeweled collars, generations of pride staring back at me in disbelief. I looked at the guards, who seemed uncertain whether to protect their future ruler from me or protect me from the court's outrage. Then I looked back at Sarah, whose golden eyes were waiting patiently for my answer, as if nothing unusual was happening at all. I said yes. That single word changed everything. Within days, I was reassigned from crawling through vents to walking the upper decks beside actual engineers, my recommendations reviewed instead of ignored. Some nobles despised the change and made that clear whenever they thought I could not hear them. Others watched carefully, waiting to see if this was a passing curiosity or the beginning of something larger. Sarah visited the engineering bay more often after that day, always with some new question about how humans approached problems differently. They wanted to understand why we adapted so quickly, why we questioned authority instead of obeying it blindly, why failure did not frighten us the way it frightened their own people. I answered as honestly as I could, and slowly, something like trust began to grow between us, strange and unlikely as it seemed. Word of that moment in the court spread far beyond the palace walls. Other human workers stationed across Velkhari territory heard the story, retold again and again, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes simplified, but the core of it always remained the same. A human technician had spoken plainly to the royal heir, without fear, without flattery, and instead of punishment, had earned genuine respect. For the first time since our defeat, humans across the empire began walking a little straighter. Guards who once ignored us started watching more carefully, unsure now whether we were simply servants or something the future ruler considered worth listening to. Nobles who once dismissed us as lesser began asking quiet questions about human engineering, human medicine, human ways of solving problems that their own rigid traditions had never considered. None of it happened quickly. Empires do not change their minds overnight, and old prejudices do not vanish because one heir smiled at one technician in one crowded hall. But something had shifted, quietly and permanently. A door that had been sealed shut for years had opened just wide enough for us to prove ourselves through actions instead of pleading through words. I still remember standing there that day, grease on my hands, heart pounding, an entire alien court holding its breath because their future ruler had chosen to kneel beside a human instead of walking past one. I never planned to become part of anything larger than fixing a broken conduit before lunch. Yet sometimes, history does not begin with grand speeches or great battles. Sometimes it begins with someone finally deciding to look closely at the people everyone else had been trained to overlook. And once Sarah looked, they never truly stopped watching us again.